Is there any truth to the legends, myths, and possible historical records describing normal-sized to giant Caucasians dwelling underground, or occasionally appearing out of the caves to surface residents, and knowing that the Bible describes a group of people that were sentenced into the earth to live? Can one assume that the mark may be their large size, and that the two groups are one and the same? I think this speculation is one that can hold merit. However, with the most critical thinking, I do not believe I can prove this as an absolute fact. However, I think there is sufficient evidence that can support this idea for serious consideration. First, there are several things going on from the text that we need to understand. As Cain was being sentenced for his crime, he was afraid of being captured or killed. God's response was that when he tilled the ground, it would not yield its strength for him. In context, I do not think God was referring to an agricultural problem, but one rather of a genetic defect that would perhaps keep he and his offspring in the subterranean environment. Consistent in the Bible is the use of growing and planting to describe genealogical progressions of life. In this context, it would make more logical sense and also backed by observable as evidence that a genetic defect is what the Lord was speaking of. God also states he had put a mark as an agreement and a supernatural sign or an act upon Cain. Something of a transformation to Cain is happening as he is sentenced to wander in the land of Nod. He is changed already in his soul by sin that has permeated him and his future offspring. In spite of this, he is given some kind of supernatural power to endure or protect himself. This is confirmed in the most unusual manner, but consistent in the Bible. Chuck Missler discovered a most interesting thing about lineages in the Scriptures. I will let him tell you himself.
Another God appears to have laid out his plan in advance, and that's in some subtleties, and one of which I'd like to share with you in Genesis chapter 5. In Genesis chapter 5, we have a genealogy. The genealogy in Genesis chapter 5 goes from Adam, the first man, down through Noah. And in Genesis chapter 5, if you wade through that, I encourage you to make a list of the names. Adam gave birth to Seth. Seth, Enosh. Enosh, Kenan. Kenan, Mahalalel. Mahalalel, Jared. Jared, Enoch. Enoch, Methuselah. Methuselah, Lamech. And Lamech was the father of Noah. Let's take these names. 10 names. But see, the problem is we need to know what the names mean. And if you have a study Bible or a source, a lexicon, what have you, you know that the name Adam means man. As you go through your Bible, when these names are typically first introduced, most of your marginal footnotes will tell you what the name means. Adam means man. Seth means appointed. Enosh means mortal. Kenan means sorrow. Mahalalel means the blessed God. Jared means shall come down. Enoch means teaching. Methuselah means his death shall bring. Lamech means the despairing. And the word Noah means rest or comfort. Now, let's read that genealogy as a sentence. Man is appointed mortal sorrow. The blessed God shall come down, teaching that his death shall bring the despairing comfort. Isn't that wild?
This kind of biblical interpretation recognized in the Hebrew culture is called asad. Although seemingly mystical, it is perfectly acceptable as part of proper biblical interpretation. Establishing this discovery as a pattern, I have done the same thing to the 6 generations of Cain mentioned after the murder. Here is what the lineage using the same process tells us. Striked out to possess, disciplined fugitive, smitten of God, who is of God, powerful. What are the mathematical chances that this was coincidental? This was the description of Cain striking out his brother to take what he felt was his. Or it might have an even deeper meaning. Cain means spearhead, as in the process of striking out to make a claim or possession. Could this be describing a bigger picture here? Could this be an illusion of Satan's plan to establish his own firstborn seed to usurp God's creation? Jesus did mention in the parable of the wheat and tares that the enemy had sown his own seed among God's. Here is another way to look at this spear striking out to take a hold. It is interesting that the Wellesberg Castle, the center of all things occult as the Nazi think tank led by Himmler's SS, is shaped out in the form of a spear piercing a circle. In another part of this series, we will develop this connection further. As the encrypted message continues, Cain was disciplined by being sentenced to be a fugitive and a wanderer in the earth, and also smitten or stricken with a defect, but yet given a supernatural power. This power was ordained from God himself to fulfill his purposes. It is recorded that Cain's descendants were the first to raise animals for food, create the arts and music, first to build cities, and the first to work in metals, making implements of war. Could the mythical power of the virile Yah be a part of this power, or is it the stature and height, or perhaps both? Whatever their power is, it is supernatural and part of God's overall plan to fulfill his will. This interpretation is the only one that has logic and supported by observable evidence, even if the only surviving evidence is in myths and legends. The traits of Cain and his descendants also correspond to Noah's son Japheth. This connection is also important to understand another explanation in history, as we shall soon see. Genesis 9:27, God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. 6601, Patha is the word in Hebrew used for enlarge. It means to broaden or open one's mind to increase, but this also has a dark side connotation to the word as having a potential of vanity. The above text could be telling us details about the descendants of Japheth that are familiar to those of Cain's. This would literally mean that the descendants of Japheth would have a genetic inclination, but not exclusive, to build, explore, discover, create, and invent. But they would also think they were better because of and by their own accomplishments. They would also displace the brown race and have the black race for servants. To be honest, history would bear this out within the most recent observable evidence in the building of the American Empire. We know that Japheth was Caucasian and had the similarity to Cain. It is not a coincidence once you add up the evidence. This connection identifies and explains the legends of large white tribes from an inner earth. I have to make a disclaimer here that I am not bashing the white race, as I am a member of this group. I am also saved and secure as a child of God by his grace. I recognize God's grace and mercy and transforming power. All three races have specific positive attributes and a dark downside. All must also take responsibility for their own actions and accept God's forgiveness and transforming power likewise. If you will go to my website and look up the two seeds, you will find the rest of the story from the other races of mankind. All have sinned and none are without fault or accepting God's mercy, unless you happen, of course, to be one of the subterranean residents of Cain's descendants. The importance of understanding this link or connection is essential to understanding that there was probably an element of truth to the Nazi Aryan belief system that led them to search for an inner earth and genetic connection to relatives.